Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Discourse Education Podcast, where we break down, current affairs and analyze them, right, for the understanding of students in Singapore who are taking A levels general paper or, any other sort of humanities subject. And of course, for the O levels English students as well, or at least those who aim to take, or rather, who aim to do argumentative writing, okay, in their O levels, right? But of course, at the end of the day, this podcast is really all about, discussing current affairs. So, hey, if you're a viewer in Singapore or from other countries, you're welcome, all right? And I would love to hear your thoughts, if you would like to, write in and leave a comment or whatever, and that would be great, yeah. So, we are going to be covering a few topics today, all right? The first of which would be related to the first, ever, I guess, politically significant person under the foreign interference law in Singapore. And another issue rather that we'll be discussing today will be related to the retooling, I guess, of the grounds of the Mandai Executive Golf Course, and finally, the declining birth rates in Japan. So yeah, that's what we're gonna do today. So without further ado, we are gonna look at the first issue here, and that would be the designation of this businessman, Philip Chan, as a politically significant person under the Foreign Interference Law. So I guess there's quite a bit of context here, alright? But first, or rather quite a bit of context to break down, but first let's look at what the article says, alright? So what you have here, Singaporean businessman Chan Man Ping, I think that's how you pronounce his name, Philip, has become the first person to be designated as a PSP, or politically significant person, under a law to counter foreign interference, right? So some of the details here, okay? This news came out on 26th of February, so as of filming this video 2 days ago. Alright, and the idea, simply put, is that a politically, a significant person, or PSP, if their activities are directed towards a political end and it is in the public interest for the authorities to apply countermeasures, then, that person will be designated as such. Alright. Now, some more context here according to this article. Okay. Mr. Chan came from Hong Kong, right? And he was a naturalized Singaporean citizen. So he has his citizenship here. Okay. And in being designated as such, he has to disclose annually political donations of $10,000 or more that he receives and accepts, right? And any other sort of foreign affiliations and migration benefits to this particular person. Okay, now some more context on Mr. Chan. All right, he heads the Hong Kong Chamber of Commerce. He has been president of the Kowloon Club since 2011. If I'm not wrong, he's the one who founded it as well. All right, and he has been involved in grassroots activities. So that means, I guess work that all your residential communities do with the residents in all the various housing estates. And in this particular case, he was particularly involved in the Kampong Chai Chee Citizens Consultative Committee, as well as the Bukit Timah Community Club Management Committee. Wow, that's really near from here. All right. So grassroots activities, okay, typically involve you literally going, going on the ground and trying to find out, right, all the issues that residents of those particular housing estates face. So my grandfather himself, he was particularly active, right, as a grassroots member in Singapore during the nation building years. All right, he was one of the I guess a committee, the executive committee that did all the fundraising and the eventual construction of Bukit Panjang Community Club. All right. So grassroots activity is that, okay, there's a lot of, talking to your Singaporeans, okay, trying to find out, what their lives are like, and trying essentially to find ways to make their lives easier, right, to render help where we can, and then of course do a whole bunch of activities to build more community spirit and all that, okay. So yeah, that as of now, all right, I don't think the government will disclose more details than just simply announcing this, all right. And yeah, that's the breakdown of the article in short, or a quick summary of it. Okay, so first we need to understand what this foreign interference law is. Okay, so this law, the full name obviously is FICA, all right. I can't remember what it stands for, but you can go and search MHA's website. So for instance, if you look at this web page here, okay, why is it loading so slowly? Yeah, the internet's not cooperating with me today. But essentially what this law is all about, all right, is that it is a law that was passed to counter any sort of foreign interference in Singapore. And by foreign interference, we don't just mean, interference in our foreign policy, right? So that means we are not trying to, or rather, we are trying to stop other countries from, dictating what we should do in terms of how we conduct our diplomatic relations with other nations, what our stances what our stance is on the various, issues that occur in the world, right? Of which there are international interests, essentially. Okay, so it's not just about that. It's also about protecting the domestic, I guess, interference, right? Because when we talk about foreign interference, okay, and I'll talk more about this later on, essentially, any sort of foreign influences in the domestic context typically would be geared towards the interests of those other powers. Okay, so when this law was passed, obviously, or at least when it was still being debated in Parliament, there was a lot of debate surrounding it, especially regarding a possible use of this law to define, I guess, any sorts of disagreements with government policy as a form of political dissent, and then that would this law would enable the government to be able to put that down. All right, so whether or not we agree with this law, that is not really the discussion here, okay, because obviously at the end of the day, okay, there we go. So if you look at the browser here, it says Foreign Interference Countermeasures Act, okay, that's the full name of it, and it was passed on October 4th, 2021. If you go and read up more on the context surrounding the passing of this law, you will notice that essentially the opposition opposed this, obviously, all right? And again, as I said, we are not here to, analyze whether or not this is the right move, all right? Because number one, we are not political analysts. Number two, that's not really what we are doing today. Not just today, actually, just in this podcast in general. What we are trying to find out would be the impacts of all these current affairs, all right, and how we can use them as examples in our essays, all right. So the context of passing this particular law, okay, aside from all the debate surrounding it, we need to understand what was happening at that point of time in 2021, all right. So for the H2 history students that may be watching this, you have an advantage here because the skill is essentially the same in terms of, how you make use of contextual knowledge, right? You situate an event within that particular context and what was happening at that point of time, and how that may in turn influence the promulgation of this particular law in the first place. Okay, so when it was passed in 2021, right, there were quite a lot of contextual global affairs events that of which we need to take note. All right, not least of which would be the general trend, I guess, of turning away from globalization as a whole and towards anti-globalization. All right, and what that also entailed was a lot of countries, I guess, especially the more powerful ones, might use this opportunity to, influence, I guess, spread a little bit of influence, in other countries' domestic politics, and in turn, try and shape the domestic politics towards a particular end, all right, that would suit their own interests. Okay, the key of which, I mean, obviously, this was a very stupid move, in my opinion, but one of the biggest events, and I guess it's very easy to forget about this, but during the 2020 elections in itself, right, so a year prior to the passing of this law, the then president, all right, the incumbent President Donald Trump, okay, it was discovered that he was trying to pressure the Ukrainian president, the same one, Zelensky, okay, to interfere in US elections in exchange for some, particular aid, I guess. All right, and of course, obviously, this was before the outbreak of the Russia-Ukraine war. All right, but yeah. So because of an increasing preponderance of all these things, that's why this law was passed. All right, that was the context at that point of time. Now, of course, the next thing that we need to understand would be, what are all these politically significant persons in the first place, as defined under this particular law. So all these PSPs, all right, and no, I'm not referring to PlayStation Portable, okay, if you remember what that is, all right, kudos to you. They are, I wouldn't say agents of other states, okay, because then we'll just call them spies, all right, but these are people who might be susceptible to foreign influences. What that means is that through them, okay, they may receive certain, benefits or donations from other countries, and in turn they would then try and influence the domestic events in such a way that it suits the interests of those other countries. So what they do, of course, there is a huge variety of things that they could do, but some things would be, let's say, being quite sympathetic towards a particular country's foreign policy, or a particular country's way of doing things, and in turn trying to influence others to sort of like come to the same conclusion as them in terms of their political views, ideology, so on and so forth. Obviously, it depends on what all these PSPs are trying to do, but often the end game, in short, is to create a situation whereby in the long term, the entire country may be sympathetic towards a particular, let's say, a strong power in the world, all right? And that would in turn, perhaps create a situation of, I don't know, almost sort of like a proxy state kind of situation, okay, where the smaller country would essentially echo the I guess the policies of the larger nation. I mean, this is just one example, all right? Of course, there are multiple end games here, okay, possible end games. According to Al Jazeera, though, and just to highlight this here, if you're gonna read Al Jazeera, just read it critically as well, because it's quite left-leaning, right? But nevertheless, the optics of his actions, if you're gonna read that article, all right, it's not really good, because Mr. Philip Chan, he has, quite publicly echoed, or not say echoed, quite publicly stated sort of like lean towards China, okay, And of course, this has not been confirmed by the Singaporean government, so we don't know, even though this man has been designated as a PSP, we do not know of which country is he, to which country is he particularly susceptible in terms of their, influence, all right? So that's the general context here, and why this thing is so significant. Simply put, because if there are such individuals around, there is a chance, right, no matter how small, that the government has to step in and make sure that yes, we remain open to other countries for economic opportunities, all right? We remain open to trade and maintaining diplomatic relations with many countries in the world. So if I'm not wrong, we have diplomatic relations with at least 170 countries, all right? Please do go and fact check that. Okay, so yeah, that's the thing. The government wouldn't want anybody to come in and sort of like exert the interests of other countries within the context of Singapore, right? And this might seem like a slippery slope here, but if they were to succeed, what sort of implications would they see? Would there possibly be, in short, in Singapore? All right, and that's what we are here to break down. Okay, number one, obviously, it may come over time that there are many other sort of like PSPs rising up, right? And the reason for this, okay, there are some things that we need to take note of here. Number one, our ethnicity makeup. Okay, it's as simple as that. All right. So the thing is that Singapore is a nation that's founded on immigration, right? So I mean, obviously, all these things have been taught to you guys in your secondary school history, all right? Specifically during Sec 1 and Sec 2. The idea being that when the British colonized Singapore back then, all right, and essentially set up a free port and galvanize commercial activities and eventually restructuring their colonies in Southeast Asia to make it such that Singapore was a crown colony under direct rule from the metropole in London, and we sort of served as one of the 4 ports of access to the inner, I guess, areas of Malaya back then. All right, so that means the extraction of all those natural resources back then, right? Spices, or to be more specific, okay, Malaya back then exported a lot of tin, all right, a lot of rubber and palm oil. So the exports of all these primary products would go to places like Malacca, Singapore, Penang, I think. I always forget the last one. I think it's called Dinding. Okay, so yeah, as a result of that, all right, many migrants came here back then, seeking employment and seeking opportunities, right? So as a result, what we have here would be, as you see today, a majority Chinese community. The natives will be the Malays. And then you also have an Indian community as well. That's why Singapore has emphasized so much on multiculturalism and all that for national unity purposes. But the thing is that precisely because of all this historical context, right, the history of migration and all that, and the fact that technically Singapore is a nation that's made up of all these different ethnic diasporas from other countries. And I'm not trying to accuse them of anything, just to be clear, but there may be things that other nations may not be afraid to use, to justify how to frame certain matters. What do I mean by that? For example, okay, and this is just a hypothetical example. If Singapore is a majority Chinese nation, right? Then they may frame it as such, wouldn't it make sense that these Chinese re-identify with the land from whence they came. So China, in short. Alright. Now, if Singaporeans, and I doubt that this would happen, okay, if Singaporeans come to identify more and more with China, and then you have a Chinese majority in our ethnic makeup, right, in our demographics, what may possibly happen, you know? So the thing is that, again, as I said earlier, this may seem like a slippery slope, but if all these PSPs were allowed to just run unchecked and continue to, you know, exert their foreign influence, okay, then national identity may be undermined, alright? And then, of course, we also need to keep in mind that nations are turning more towards, or rather, various communities all over the world, they are turning more and more, unfortunately, towards nativist sort of arguments. So, nationalism based on particular ethnicities or the native makeup, I guess, of that particular population, so on and so forth, right? That's why earlier I said, you know, nations may not be afraid to use certain, you know, framing, all right, to justify why that country, you know, might possibly be associated with a larger power. Okay, I'm not gonna go further than that, obviously, because all these things are just sort of hypotheticals, right? We are discussing hypotheticals here, but of course the threat is very, very real. And we also need to keep in mind, and this one, you know, the H2 history students would know, it's not as though we haven't faced such issues before. We have. In fact, in the early years of our independence, or even right before independence, right, and this was 2 or 3 generations ago, there was confrontasi. So Singapore was, Singapore and Malaysia back then, these two nations, right, or technically at that point of time when confrontasi started, Singapore had just merged with Malaysia, okay. The entire Malaysian archipelago, as well as Borneo and Singapore, were considered by the then Indonesian President Sukarno as part of a greater Indonesia. To put it in very crass terms, in short, right, Singapore, or at least according to Sukarno back then, and of course Malaysia, should be part of Indonesia. And due to that, that's why we have had, you know, particularly significant would be the McDonald House bombing, right? Where the 2 Indonesian commandos bombed that particular building. So that's why oh, apologies about that, you know, it just suddenly came up. Yeah. So yeah, that's why, understandably, right, Singapore would have to be very, very, I guess, cautious when it comes to, you know, protecting our sovereignty and all that, okay. I mean, of course, other national security issues also come into account. Things like, we are a very small nation, let's face it. Our army might be considered quite strong, but how big can our army be, right? We don't even have the enough population to create 4 divisions to have a 4-star general. Yeah, so in comparison to, let's say, the armies of the larger powers, it's not like we can fight and defeat them. So there are all these other national security concerns that we need to account for, right? Not just in terms of military defense or deterrence, right? But also in terms of I guess putting out safeguards against possible foreign interferences and foreign influences. So that's why this issue is actually particularly significant. Okay, if we are going to look at it in terms of, you know, its implications on Singapore as a whole. Okay, now how do we use this example, all right, in our essays or even AQ? there are some talking points here that we can certainly break down on top of all the other things that we have already mentioned. Well, I see we is just me, right? That I've already mentioned, okay? But the first talking point is that international relations alone is insufficient to guarantee safety and sovereignty. Alright? So as I said just now, military measures are still necessary. And even though we can't realistically win against the armies of these other big nations, alright, it is still necessary, alright, for the sake of defense and or deterrence. And the third point here is that you can use this example in essays related to diplomacy. Alright? And of course, you will rarely see such questions because such questions in the context of general paper would be the very, very difficult ones. Simply on the basis that foreign relations is quite a complicated topic to tackle at this particular level, right? For the A levels. So an example of a question that may, I guess, where it may be suitable for you to use this example would be, let's see, here we go. Right, it will be this question. So this question is from NYJC. all right, it's 2020 prelims. You can possibly use that question, that example, right, or this example of Mr. Philip Chan for this particular example. Considering the increasing pace of globalization, prejudice against foreigners will only get worse. Yeah. So one impact, the elephant in the room that I haven't really touched on, which, of course, you know, many of the clowns who may not necessarily have the nuance, right? They may say that, you know, hey, look, you have this case here, so what's to say that there may not be future cases? There will definitely be future cases, just to be clear. So to prevent this, we need to stop foreign migration in as much as possible. They may say that, all right? Obviously, that's just let's just call it what it is. That's just a should I be diplomatic? Yeah, I should be diplomatic. That's just wrong, okay? Because to justify stopping the entry of foreigners simply on this basis and on this one case, it's not really worth it if you consider the wider impacts on the economy as a whole. Because, and I'll talk more about this later when we discuss Japan, right? Our country is already facing an issue of aging population. Costs of living are increasing such that your younger generations, alright, so people like me, and of course whoever that's watching this, will find it more difficult to start families in the future. Inevitably, birth rates will continue to decrease, or actually hopefully not, but at the very least, you know, sort of like plateau wherever we are, right? And to get it to increase again, it's really quite difficult. So in order to supplement the labor force, we need immigration. We need it. It is absolutely crucial to our own survival, right? When it comes to the economic development and economic processes, because we often tend to forget, right? We bring in foreign workers. They are the ones who build our roads. They are the ones who build our houses. We bring in PMET foreigners. They are the ones who may bring expertise and different perspectives from other cultures. Because yes, we can educate students as much as possible. Singapore can run as many campaigns regarding lifelong learning as possible, but inevitably, right, there will be different perspectives where we may not necessarily take into consideration when it comes to, let's say, something as simple as running a marketing campaign, right? We may think, okay, this is how we need to do things, but we can be very creative about that, but maybe someone else from a different culture may come in and offer their 2 cents, right? Hey, why not take this direction? Let's see if it tries. Things like that, you know, all these small little intangibles. And of course, you know, deepening ties with other countries, right? So that we can collaborate more. And of course, you know, just from an individual perspective, your life just becomes more interesting because you know more people, more foreigners, right, who come from different backgrounds, okay, with vastly different views. All right, so yeah, but you can still use this example to point out that there is one possible negative impact of the increasing pace of globalization, in that Singapore may become very, very susceptible to, or I shouldn't say very, very susceptible, that's the wrong term, may become vulnerable to foreign influences if we don't put up safeguards, right? And when these things happen, prejudice will indeed get worse. So this is one way that you can use this particular example here. All right, so just to sum up, okay, this case I would recommend really keeping a close eye on it if you're interested in writing IR questions, so international relations questions. All right, and yeah, that's for this particular segment. So thanks for watching the Discourse Education podcast. All right, if you are interested in, you know, asking a question, right, certainly do submit a question here, all right, using this link. If you are interested in H2 history, general paper, O levels English, all right, tuition, because ultimately the Discourse Education is a tuition service, do, you know, contact us using these details here, our socials, or you can directly contact us using our contact numbers, right, on the website. So yeah, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.